governance, raising ESG awareness amongst listed companies, further strengthen trust in markets with investors, attract higher quality investors to further broaden and deepen India's capital markets, and provide products and services for market development. At NSE, we have established a center of excellence in corporate governance and engage in various studies and discussions with stakeholders regularly to further the cause of better governance. Another major step in this direction is NSE Prime. The NSE Prime norms and framework prescribe the details for higher standards of corporate governance than those required by regulations that may be adopted voluntarily by NSE listed companies. Listed companies that voluntarily choose to be part of NSE Prime will need to comply with predefined norms on an ongoing basis, which will be monitored by NSE. These norms are aimed towards strengthening independence of boards, independent directors and auditors, removing or mitigating conflict of interest situations, strengthening and standardizing financial disclosures, and improving the quality of public information. For companies, recognition by investors of a voluntary commitment to higher standards of corporate governance and the ability to distinguish themselves from other companies is, we think, a strong motivation from a brand and reputational standpoint. Potentially, this could also lead to better valuation and better quality of investors. From an investor perspective, we believe that identifying companies which have higher governance standards and those that manage governance risk better would enhance investors' trust in such companies. We have an excellent lineup of thought leaders in corporate governance as part of today's event. Our sincere thanks to our keynote speakers, Mr. Uday Kotak and Mr. Mohandas Pai, and the eminent speakers on an excellent panel comprising Mr. Cyril Schroff as moderator, Mr. Amar Gill, Head of Investment Stewardship, Asia Pacific at BlackRock, Mr. Arun Duggal, Chairman of ICRA, Mr. Navneet Munot, MD and CEO, HDFC Asset Management Company, and Mr. Sanjeev Bikhchandani, Founder and Executive Vice Chairman, InfoEdge. This panel discussion on measuring up to expectations, which will be moderated by Cyril, I'm sure will be thought-provoking and insightful. Thank you once again for your participation.
Vikram, may I now request our Chief Regulatory Officer, Ms. Priya Subramanian, to make a presentation. Priya, over to you.
Tirthankar, before we move to Priya, we're going to do a launch of the NSE Prime logo. So we'll first do that.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Need to move.
The floor is yours, Priya.
Everyone, and thanks for joining us today. Just have the
You need to be slightly
louder.
louder. Okay.
You speak up. Huh?
Quickly go through the broad contours of what NSE Prime
Just
is.
speak up a little. Speak up.
So NSE Prime, as I already said, is voluntary. It's an NSE initiative. It's voluntary for companies, and and what NSE Prime does is to describe or rather prescribe corporate governance standards that are stricter than today's law, which is the LODR or the Companies Act. So what do these norms aim at actually? So essentially, the pillars of these norms are like this, that what we want to do is to strengthen the independence of boards. We want to we have independent directions. We have
It's a problem.
Priya, you might need to be louder, please.
What the prescriptions are a non-executive chairman and a chairman who's not related to the MD. We're thinking of what we've also prescribed is chairman of the board cannot be the chair of the audit committee or RMC, and certain other factors. When we think about conflict of interest, we have certain prescriptions which actually refer to the fact that audit teams cannot be hired by the company concerned, the NSE Prime company, without a cool-off period. When we think about board engagement with shareholders, one of the prescriptions is that the SRC should actually meet with the shareholders, at least the key shareholders, the larger shareholders, about 45 days to 60 days before the AGM, understand what their issues are and discuss with management and so on. The goal of the last two bullets on this page, improving the quality of public information and strengthening and standardizing financial disclosures. The point is, there are, we will go through in the next few slides, there are certain ratios, there are certain financial pieces of financial information which the NSE Prime company has to provide for itself and for its material subsidiaries. And what we propose to do when we think about the quality of public information, one is obviously it'll appear as part of the broader NSE website, but for NSE Prime companies, what we are proposing to do is to actually have a section of our website which will give all the information relating to these set of companies at one place. Therefore, from a broader investor perspective, people will be able to access that information quickly, and it will be what we think is just the fact that this quality of the information is available out there and it is easily accessible, frankly improves the quality from our perspective. So how is this going to work? So we are launching today. However, the companies will have a period of 6 months to actually, when we did an analysis of all the companies on our main board, there would be one or two things which each company would have to do in order to get eligible. Therefore, on our main board, we're giving a period of 6 months, and we will actually open NSE Prime on 1st of July 2022. And what we at that point of time, the companies have to qualify. During the period from now until, as I said, 1st July, we will be putting out more information on our website, not just the norms, but also the draft agreement and so on and so forth, which companies can refer to. The expectation is that companies need to be obviously compliant on entry, and there is continuous compliance as well, which NSE, the regulatory department of NSE, will monitor. One thing that we need to note that the entry or exit out of NSE Prime does not affect the company's listing status or segment status. Therefore, if the company is, for example, in derivatives, it continues to remain there. If it's in cash, it continues to remain there. And if it's part of any particular index or indices, that does not change either. There are a couple of things that we've thought about. So what would happen if for example, a company is forced to not, be compliant continuously? There would be situations in which an NSE Prime company will get cure time. For example, if there's a change in board composition to a sudden vacancy, etc., there would be a cure time, but there could be also other situations in which the NSE Prime company will have to be excluded from the Prime set. That depends on a case-to-case basis, and there will be a committee which will go through the reasons and take a decision at that point of time. The other thing that we have provided for, and as our MD said, NSE Prime is also a glide path for the regulator to come back at a later point of time and actually prescribe some of these norms as mandatory. Therefore, from our perspective, we will also be looking at revision of these norms with notice, and what we're thinking about is a 6-month notice to the market. Our MD already said this, but what is in it for investors? Clearly, investors will be able to identify companies that have higher governance standards and manage their own governance risk better, because from an investor perspective, especially institutional investors are also obviously responsible to their own stakeholders. From a company's perspective, we believe that voluntary commitment to these higher standards will be recognized by the investors, by the market. Companies will have an opportunity to distinguish themselves from other companies that are not part of the prime set, and potentially it could lead to better valuation, could lead to better quality of investors. And from an NSE perspective, just given our role in India, we think that this is an opportunity for us to be a catalyst for raising the bar on corporate governance and strengthening the trust that investors have in markets. And as a result of all of this, we also expect that there'll be a consequential broadening and deepening of our markets. Let me get to some of the key features. Just to emphasize, these are just some of the features, the next 2 or 3 slides. So essentially, one of the key features is minimum public shareholding of 40%. Chairperson of the board has to be a non-executive director and not related to the managing director. What we've also tried to do is to make sure that the chairpersons of key committees, such as RMC, SRC, Stakeholders Relationship Committee, Nomination Remuneration Committee, Audit Committee, shall be independent directors. We have tightened some of the norms from an audit committee perspective and have said that at least 3/4 of the members of the audit committee have to be independent directors. And chairman of the board will not be eligible to be the chairperson of either the RMC, NRC or audit committee. One of the other key features of NSE Prime is that when a person is a director of an NSE Prime company, that person cannot serve on the boards of more than 5 public limited companies. But to the limited extent that today's situation is that there are directors that are serving on boards of potential NSE Prime companies and are also serving on certain other boards, there is a grandfathering available, just so that that a person is not required to choose between one board and the other. And lastly, what we want to also emphasize is that we had started off, from a sustainability perspective, we had started off with integrated reporting and so on and so forth. Now that SEBI has already made BRSR, and SEBI is one of the, in fact, probably the first regulator to do so. We have made BRSR, which is the Business Responsibility and Sustainability Disclosure, as essential and central to NSE for an NSE Prime company. And therefore, there are a couple of points here. One is both essential indicators and leadership indicators, both will become mandatory for an NSE Prime company. Okay. I just want to make one more point here in terms of, directorships. So the grandfathering is for existing directors, right? So therefore, if they come up for rotation and they finish their term, then the expectation is that, at that point of time, the company will meet the norms. This slide is slightly busy, but let me just go through some of these things. So when we think, so what we did was actually to make a differentiation between finance companies, that is banks and NBFCs, and non-finance companies. And the disclosures for both are slightly different. What is here again, just to emphasize, is just certain examples. So there are about 12, about a dozen ratios which an NSE Prime company will have to disclose. It will have to be done so on a quarterly basis. And over and above the issues, the ratios, there are also certain financial information. There is some of them are set out here. For a bank and an NBFC, total non-performing loans at the end of the quarter, capital adequacy ratio, return on assets, and then there are about 3 or 4 other things that have to be disclosed. For a non-finance company, again, there are about 7 or 8 ratios. And along with the ratios, we are thinking about the loans that they have taken, which their lenders have classified as non-performing, and the deposits that we have made. I think it's which the companies have made. So I think it's a bit intuitive that, given the fact that what has happened in the markets in the past 2 or 3 years, some of these things I think will resonate with investors as well as to why these disclosures might be helpful. Lastly, from a broader perspective, all companies have to give all their material litigation. Apart from that, whenever any company is actually overdue, And default situation, of course, will be, banks and financial institutions themselves will disclose. But the company will also have to disclose anything that is overdue also. An NSE Prime company will have to disclose that. One other point that I want to make here from a key governance, disclosure perspective is that the audit committee will actually need to give prior approval if any non-audit service is to be provided by the statutory auditor or by any associate of the statutory auditor. That's all I have for you, but we will be, me and my team will be available for more questions. Any corporate wants to reach out to us, we will talk and put out our contact numbers. This is just to give some perspective and flavor of what NSE Prime might entail. Over to you, Tirthankar. Thank you.
Thank you, Priya. That actually gives a very, very clear idea of what NSE Prime is all about, and your offer of providing even more information in this regard, I'm sure will be taken up by the corporate universe. Maybe as we go ahead in the program, can we now have the first keynote address by Mr. Uday Kotak? Saurabh?
Corporate governance is a subject of intense debate, both globally and in India. The debate centers around enterprise and governance. There are people who believe that excessive ticking of the boxes leads to impact on entrepreneurial spirit of an institution. My view is that proper governance actually supports entrepreneurship and professionalism in a firm or an institution. For sustainable growth of enterprise, we need to ensure that the best of governance standards are put in place. It gives confidence to a wide variety of investors that the interests of all stakeholders are being taken care of. I had the privilege to chair a committee appointed by SEBI in 2017 to review the entire gamut of governance norms. Many of those recommendations have now been put in place by the regulator. However, my view is governance is not just about what is put in place. It's about a state of mind, about a genuine belief that we must grow on a principle of doing the right things without giving up the core objective of business, which is enterprise, creativity, professionalism, and growth. And I am convinced that good governance will lead to superior performance for companies in the listed space. We've also got to keep in mind that a company which is 100% owned by a shareholder versus a company which has a wide number of shareholders, there has to be a difference. And therefore, transparency, trust are the core to public money, which we all enjoy in a listed company. It is in this context that a number of changes have happened. And my view is that we need to keep in mind as we add more rules and regulations that it should not be ticking the box. At times, there seems to be a one-upmanship between different players in trying to make themselves look better, including in many cases, the policymakers. I think we need to continue to focus on better governance and a combination of rule and principle-based regulation and a belief that at the end of it, good people and good board members and management will do the right thing. Keeping this backdrop, I'm delighted that NSE is taking a step in the direction of furthering governance in corporate India. It is the step in the right direction, and it will help attract more capital, both domestically and globally, for companies in India. So I wish NSE all the best for its new initiative. And I do look forward to Indian companies becoming champions, not only in India, but globally. So corporate India, let's march ahead forward with high standards of governance without giving up our spirit of entrepreneurship, creativity, and an important aspect of moving India to global scale in the top 5 in every segment of business. Thank you very much.
Mr. Kotak is right. Corporate governance is not just about rules; it's about a state of mind, and NSE Prime really, goes a long way towards making that real. May I now invite Mr. TV Mohandas Pai for our second keynote address. Mr. Pai, over.
Thank you very much, folks. Good to talk to all of you and share some views. We heard Uday talk about what good corporate governance does to people. I want to congratulate NSE for creating an elite list of those companies who follow superior standards. It's only by setting standards and enhancing standards that we better ourselves and create a better market and a better country. And this can come only when we have the energy and the passion to always do better and better and better, set higher standards so that we lead. And this has to come from within the enterprise, within the listed company, and from within the people in charge. So good corporate governance cannot be something exceptional. It must be the norm. Standard setting should be the norm. And all of us have a responsibility as fiduciary agents of listed companies to do this on a continuous basis. Because all board members will be tested on the grounds of public faith. If the public trust you as people of honor, people of great integrity, your life will be done. You will be looked upon with respect. And for all of us, getting the respect of all stakeholders is the most important asset we have. And that can come only with good corporate governance. Investment is an act of faith. A listed company gets evaluated every single second on the marketplace. The market decides in its wisdom what is the value of the company every single moment. None of us can be masters of the universe because the economy and the investors with their emotions decide everything. So good corporate governance and transparency is a competitive advantage. We are in a competitive environment and we have to compete. And if you have good corporate governance and transparency, it gives you a great competitive advantage. The faith and trust in a company depends upon the corporate governance standards of a listed company, its earnings potential and growth. The PE, the PE is a reflection of all this. The difference in the PE between similar companies shows clearly the value placed by investors in high corporate governance. During periods of great market stress, these companies stand out as there's a flight to quality. So I want to congratulate NSE again for creating this benchmark. Now, let me share some views. What does good corporate governance do? One, it increases trust in the listed entity. And like I said, trust means that people will support you to thick and thin and stand by you. And we have seen that in the market performance of listed stocks. We have seen that in the faith and respect people have in certain companies which follow high standards. It increases transparency and disclosure in the market. Markets move on transparency and disclosure, on information. And the information should be available to all. And the information should be of a high quality. And all this comes with good corporate governance standards, with the processes that you follow to make sure that the information you give out has great integrity and follows high standards. And for management within the enterprise, good corporate governance reduces the asymmetry of information, because in every large company, between the people who run the company, the board, and the people within, there is an asymmetry of information. We all see through our eyes. We don't record everything. But if you have a process which captures a lot of the information that you need, which leads to good corporate governance standards, it reduces the asymmetry of information, leading to better decision making. And those of you who run big companies know this too well. If you're the CEO, it's a lonely job at the top. There are moments of crisis when you have to decide. If you're the board in the crisis, you have to decide many things. And if you're up to date with the information, and the information is transparent, information available to you on a continuous basis, you know that you will take decisions based on information, which will be very, very good for you. It improves the process for better quality of information for management to take good decisions, like I said. And the true test of corporate governance happens in a crisis. When everything is great, everything is great. When things go bad, and things are going to go bad in a capitalist economy, We will go to booms and downturns, and that is the time when the continued sustainability of the enterprise is ensured. Corporate organizations which are listed have to survive. All of us have to survive and grow. If the market falls steeply, you could be taken over by somebody. And if you want to survive, you need to make sure that you retain the trust of investors in you, and the cost of takeover should be high. Because if the market falls deeply and you got a large amount of floating stock, you could be bought very cheaply, and that's the end of the enterprise, right? So survival implies that you follow good corporate governance standards as a protection to make sure you survive very long. It reduces the cost of capital. It reduces the cost of capital so you can raise capital for your business and make sure that you stay competitive. It also improves your access to capital. Whenever you need capital, capital is available to you. People are there with the checkbooks signing to give you money when you want it, not when the market says they can get it. It strengthens you and makes you much more competitive. These are the good aspects. It attracts better talent. The safest pillow is the clear conscience, right? And when you have a clear conscience, it attracts better talent, because the talent that comes to you knows very surely that when they go home, they can get a good sleep because they will know no wrong. Good corporate governance standards means that you do no wrong, because the thought of doing wrong will not come to mind. If the thought of doing wrong comes to mind, you have to look yourself in the mirror and find out what is happening. It places the entity overall in a better position and gives you branding benefits. It brands you better. It gives you an advantage. You can sell your products much better. And these are great advantages. And how can it happen in any company? It can happen only, like some of the earlier speakers said, by creating a coalition of the good. The board members have to be picked with care. They have to be highly independent people, not afraid to speak their mind. They should not be afraid to walking off the board in case a wrong decision is taken or something goes wrong. The CEO should not be afraid of just submitting his resignation going if things corporate governance standards fail. The CFO should make sure that he or she is responsible for the financial integrity of the enterprise at all times. And all the three triad of CEO, COO, and CFO should stand up for the enterprise during all times and do what is always right based on information. And then the board has to be with people, men and women of great integrity, men and women of great standing, of great qualities of heart and mind, who will stand for the truth, who will stand for the best, and who will make sure the corporation always does the best thing that could happen. And who will never say that we didn't know about this. We could not take a right decision. We got carried away. Because the moment you are on the board, you have to take great responsibility. And with great responsibility comes great happiness if you're able to discharge it. And for that, good corporate governance standards is necessary. And if NSE Prime comes out with norms which are higher than the listed norms, just like Priya told us, and you follow the norms, you can be rest assured that there is somebody monitoring what you do, giving you feedback so you can be better. So I want to congratulate NSE for this great effort. I'm very, very happy that they're doing it and they will take India forward. India should be known as a country which has got exceptional corporate governance standards. The cost of equity for Indian enterprises when they raise capital in the global markets has to come down. We have to create Indian multinationals. We need greater access to capital. And all this can come when global investors trust you. And they will trust you if you follow good corporate governance standards. And they will trust you more if you set higher standards than what they see in the home market. And NSE Prime is setting higher standards. Thank you very much and wish you all the best. I do hope very many companies in this country will sign up and create this list to demonstrate to the world that they are among the best the world has ever has. Thank you and best wishes.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Mr. Pai, for your kind words. I mean, truly, in your address, you touched upon several aspects of what NSE Prime stands for, and you actually enunciated the enormous advantages that a corporate will have if it actually adheres to this rarefied field. To discuss some of the aspects that you touched upon in your address, in terms of performance, in terms of branding, in terms of standing in the face of stress. As you rightly pointed out, in a capitalist economy, stress is something that one is likely to see. And to discuss some of these fine points, we have a panel discussion now. As I mentioned earlier, and Vikram also did, we have Mr. Arun Duggal, Mr. Navneet Munot, Mr. Amar Gill, Cyril Schroff, and Mr. Sanjeev Bikhchandani. And I would now request Mr. Sunil Shroff to take over and moderate the panel discussion. Over to you, Mr. Shroff.
Thank you very much, Tirthankar, and my congratulations to NSE for this great initiative. I think it's clearly a step in the right direction. I've always believed that corporate governance is a journey, not a destination. And we've seen that, right, this is a journey that India has seen unfold in a very formal way over the last 20 years, where there have been so many reports by eminent business folks and thinkers. After the Satyam episode, we saw a wholesale reorganization of the Companies Act, and a new version came out in 2013. We saw a few years ago the Uday Kotak report on corporate governance as well. But I'm pretty sure that this is a journey that is still going to continue. The world is getting more complex, markets are getting more complex, and there will be continuous improvements. Every few days we see something coming out in terms of a tweak from SEBI or from the MCA, and I think these are all headed in the broad same direction of better governance, reduction or removal of conflicts, better disclosures, guidance in terms of how board should be composed. So similar sort of toolkit, but this is just getting more and more. The standards are getting higher. So interesting and important initiative by NSE, and we must congratulate them. And I think all of us will, in our own way, promote the idea as well. So the topic that has been given to me to moderate the panel for is not a sales pitch for NSE Prime. In fact, it's a much broader discussion on stakeholder model of governance, and it's an interesting construct. So when I was approached by NSE, I sort of asked, what do you want to achieve in this panel? And as it became obvious, I think the idea was to have a very deep, frank, and interesting conversation about what does stakeholder model of governance mean. Because while there is a lot of public discourse that is taking place in this space, whether it's stakeholder model of governance, purpose-led corporations, ESG, and all of these kind of semi-connected themes as well. I think at the end of it, we must come down to some of the core issues underlying this and examine what does it really mean. And I was specifically told to be provocative and to sort of unpack some of the real issues. So I'm going to stick to that brief. I believe that the stakeholder model of governance really goes back in Indian culture, goes back a long time. I mean, without any religious overtones. I mean, even if you look at the concept of Ram Rajya, I think that the duty of the state and the duty of the power was to really look after the entire population, all the stakeholders, and not just only any one variety of stakeholders. But a lot of things changed about 50 years ago after the kind of famous essay by Milton Friedman, where I think the idea took root that the purpose of operation really was to maximize the returns to the shareholders, not only the returns, but to maximize them. And I think that philosophy, of course, it served its great purpose, but it kind of made the entire conversation very lopsided in terms of the variety of stakeholders. To make it, even if other stakeholders were involved, it was predominantly biased towards the shareholders. So that model of governance that we have been kind of living through, largely invented in the US capital markets, was about shareholder primacy. But we've seen over the last few years that, and probably the last 5 to 7 years, that model has been significantly challenged. Even in global markets, largely market driven, not necessarily legislation driven. The stakeholder model has assumed significant prominence. In fact, Amar Gill's firm BlackRock, and especially their chairman Larry Fink, has been a big driver in terms of that thinking as well. But India has done better. India actually legislated for it under the New Companies Act of 2013, where we kind of formally, and probably the only country in the world, where we kind of formally abandoned the shareholder primacy model and substituted it by the stakeholder model of governance. So the duty of the board, as per Section 166 of our Companies Act, is to not merely look after the shareholders, but they have to balance the interest of shareholders, of employees, of the environment, and the community. Now, no major corporate law system that I am aware of specifically puts that down in black and white, but we have done it. But of course, this was there since 2013, and I think the question was really of what does this mean, and how does it actually come to play? Because at the end of it, markets are markets, and they are going to look for profits, and they are going to look for an upside. So was it just something in black and white in a law book that lies on somebody's shelf, or was this a concept that had real life in it? So I think it continued a little bit like that, and more recently, a few months ago, our Supreme Court said, no, this is actually a real thing, and that not only do boards have a duty to all the stakeholders, but all stakeholders are also on the same place. It's not that shareholders are higher and the others are lower. So we are at a very interesting point in terms of the evolution of this whole model of stakeholder expectations and stakeholder governance. And in the spirit of being provocative and the spirit of getting some real conversations going, I'm going to share a number of questions with the panel, because I actually want to unpack the notion as to whether this is really lip service, or are we really talking about stakeholder model of governance? How easy is it to make decisions with maximization of shareholder value on the one hand, and compare it with some abstract thing relating to climate change, which might have implications, very important, nobody disputes, but which is something which might have implications many decades later. But that's some other person's problem. How easy or difficult is it to unpack themes and to take decisions when you're comparing social issues? And we saw a lot of that play out in the West, in the Black Lives movement as well. And it became, because of that one incident, it became mainstream. We've seen a lot of very large corporations invented in Silicon Valley having to deal with a very toxic culture, and then corporate governance had to step in and make all the corrections. So as the kind of sutradhar of this conversation, I'm going to set the ball rolling. I think the panel has been introduced, and I'm very privileged to have a fantastic panel to have this conversation with. And it's actually a very representative panel because it represents various stakeholders themselves. We have Amar Gill representing the kind of international investor viewpoint, and also representing an institution that has very strongly burnished its credentials on this space. Navneet, who represents also the investor point of view, but in largely in an Indian context. We have Arun Duggal, who's going to kind of represent the chairman's view, if I can call it, or the board view. And we have Sanjeev, who is a serial entrepreneur and investor as well, and has invested in some fantastic companies which have created so much value. So I think it'll have an opportunity to examine some of these issues with the benefit of his wisdom. So to set the ball rolling, I'm going to actually pose a question to the entire panel as a common question now. The first one being, the stakeholder model of governance is great, ESG is great, purpose, all of that is wonderful. But tell us honestly, are we at the stage of lip service, or are we at the stage where stakeholder model of governance has really taken root? So, Arun, maybe let me start with you.
And thank you, Cyril. As usual, you asked very direct, honest questions and deserve honest replies. I think it is work in progress. process. I think
Arun, your voice
it's practical for us to on the board. Am I audible?
your voice is
Can
breaking
you hear
up.
me?
Yeah, now it's better. Now it's better.
Okay. What I was saying, it's unrealistic to expect that a switch will get turned on and the boards will get enlightened, and from next day their thinking will change dramatically. I think it's a gradual process. It is a process which is first of all being impacted by the regulatory and the legal framework. It is also a process which is learning from what is happening around the world and how things are evolving. It is also a process when boards are facing various issues, which in the past they may have taken one limited perspective, but now the question does come up that what about the customers? What about the employees? What about the employment? What about the community in general? So it is beginning to receive a broader consideration, but early days, I would say.
Thanks for an equally honest response, Arun. Sanjeev, your thoughts?
Yeah. So my view is that corporate governance begins in the promoters' heads. Or the promoters' heads. We have seen no number of audit committees, no number of big four auditors, no number of independent directors could stop us from happening. So the beginning is in the promoter's head. Now, if that is sorted out, then all other things fall in place. It's good going. It'll happen, right? Second is, I think, Arun has been on our board for many years and was chair of audit committee, and he's seen our board work. The number of times I have been overruled by the board is not funny, right? So is a founder willing to be overruled by the board or independent members? Because I'll tell you one other thing. It's very hard to get good independent directors right now for any listed company because of the fiduciary liability. So if your aspiration is to run a well-governed company, valuable company, growing company, respected company, you will need good independence. You cannot get good independence unless you as a promoter are willing to be overruled by the board. And you have to somewhere subordinate your ego, say, I am okay being overruled by the board. It's okay. I would say there are, like Arun said, it's a mixed bag. There are some who get it and do it. And there are several others who are still working in the old mode. But ultimately, they will get it. Because we have aspired always to be well governed. I was listening to Priya and what and what she was saying. I think on the board matters that she outlined, barring one, we are already fulfilling it, and for the last decade, and we're doing it on our own because simply we're getting feedback from overseas investors, that listen, I mean, you got to be higher than the regulation. Because because that's what we expect and we hope for. So one simple thing which I didn't hear her mention is, and I think and now I think it might be mandatory in India already. But from about 2007 or 8, it was just a chance remark by an investor in a New York investor conference who said, "Listen, I worry that Indian companies only display P&L quarterly. They don't disclose balance sheet quarterly, and you can hide anything in the balance sheet in a quarter." It only comes out end of the year. So I came back and I told our CFO then, Amrish Raghavan, she said, listen, ye investor ye bola hai. And we immediately talked to the auditor and said, can we do it? They said, yes, we can do it. And for the longest time, we were revealing balance sheets quarterly as well, even though law did not require it. Although I believe now it does, but I'm not sure. I think any well-governed company, and I've got investors now calling me up, who are saying that we are probably getting a 25% premium on corporate governance because that is in short supply in India. So to Arun's comment, it is still in short supply, as believed by some investors. But if you are well governed, as Mohan said, you and Mr. Nimai said, you will get a higher valuation on pure corporate governance, and we are seeing that.
So Sanjeev, I think thanks for that honest answer. But I have one or two problems with some of the underlying assumptions. I think part of that construct which you mentioned presupposes that the kind of reference point for governance is the promoter. Good promoter, good governance, bad promoter, bad governance. But I think
what I meant was a bad promoter can evade all the
no, fair enough. So
checks. That's what I'm saying.
There will be always somebody who, but that I think there is a little bit of a problem in terms of the regulatory and policy direction that we see, and where there's a bit of over demonization of the promoter, where the starting assumption is that all promoters are bad, selfish, they will have conflicts of interest and all of that. And I don't think that is not necessarily always true.
No, that's not true. I never implied that. I never implied that.
No. So
I meant a good promoter is a necessary condition. Everything else, audit committee, independent directors, auditors, everything else is a sufficient condition.
Because so you see problems in promoter-less companies also, where there is instead of a principal conflict, you have an agency conflict as well. So we've seen all sorts of.
So let me put it this way: a good karta, the guy who's doing it, whether he's a promoter or non-promoter, a good karta.
So where the source of power is, whether it's the board, whether it's the CEO, whether it's the promoter, so long as that fountainhead is sorted out and has essentially wants to do good, that is where it is. So I think we're on the same page on that. But I didn't mean the comment on you. I meant really how the direction of the regulation is going. Every week there is some new requirement that comes out from policy, where everything is about where the underlying assumption is it's like a chore police game with the promoter, and where I think we are kind of overdoing it in terms of
actually, Cyril, if you build a reputation of being a well-governed company, every time there's a query or something either from BSE or NSE or from SEBI, and we answer it and we tell the truth, bhai ye hua tha, right? Or
yes.
is karan hua tha, right? We find that they're actually very reasonable.
Yes, so, I agree.
But we're riding off goodwill built over 1.5 decades of being regarded as a well-governed company. Ye bande theek hai, but let's find out anyway.
Yeah, I think reputation and maintaining the desire to maintain that reputation is a good indicia of governance as well. Let me shift gears now and bring in Amar. Amar, apart from you're not only representing kind of BlackRock, the institution, in this discussion, but you're an India watcher as well. I think you're in charge of stewardship, and you kind of have insight on the Indian corporate landscape as well. So same question to you. How are you seeing this conversation on stakeholder governance evolving in India? And where do you think Indian corporate governance is at this point of time? And at this point of time, as you study it, and you have the advantage of seeing it from afar.
Thank you, Cyril, and thank you for having me on this panel. Look, I think India has some unique features. This concept of promoter is quite unique for the market, but it's not very different from the idea of controlling shareholders that we see in a lot of emerging markets in the rest of Asia, etc. So, at the outset, I would agree with what Sanjeev is saying. The mindset of the promoter, of the controlling shareholder, does set the tone. And whether it's India or China or Japan or Korea, I think in all these markets, you've got some companies that are up there, that, even in emerging markets, even in India, companies where the governance standards are at the same level as what you would see in developed world. But then you get a big range. And quite often the reputation of the market isn't set by the companies that are up there. It's set by the companies that disappoint, because we all know that one hurt is worth more than 10 kisses. And so there is a range across the market. It's true in India as much as it is in other emerging markets that we look at here. I would also agree that we're at the early stages of this journey, that governance is the concept that has taken hold over the last 5 or 10 years. Good governance and the importance of a strong board is a concept that I think is now well understood with most corporates in India. But the idea of stakeholder capitalism and the other aspects of sustainability, the E and the S, and how to look at these and how to weigh these factors with profitability, with I mean, it's all under the rubric of governance, but how to weigh externalities and external costs with what you're showing in your P&L, which doesn't include external costs. That is the E and the S in ESG is getting much more attention in the last 2 or 3 years. I think COVID has a part to play there. But I think the E and the S in ESG has still further to go from where governance is right now in India and most emerging markets.
Thanks, Amar. I'm going to come back to you with a few points that you made, but there's time to bring in Navneet also for sort of helping us flesh out some of the investor perspectives.
Sure. So first of all, compliments to NSE on the launch of NSE Prime. I mean, it was a joy working with Nirmal and all other members on this several years back, and good to see it seeing that light of the day. I think we've surely moved beyond lip service, Cyril. I mean, as your question was very provocative. And if ever there was a doubt, I think the experience gained from dealing with a crisis like COVID since last year would have removed that doubt on why managing interest of diverse stakeholders is so important. And even otherwise, in a world where we are dealing with an existential crisis in the form of climate change, where we have rising inequality, and you also talked about the Black Lives Matter or maybe a Me Too movement and all the implications of that, unprecedented technological disruptions, when we look at the geopolitical realignments, I guess boards understand that focusing on shareholders alone, and that too, a narrow focus on near term at the cost of other stakeholders doesn't make any sense. And every stakeholder is essential and important for long-term value creation. In fact, and I think Mohandas Pai made a point that there's a growing realization that stakeholder primacy and sustainability at heart can actually be a source of competitive advantage or creating a structural moat for the business. And that is what a shareholder looks for in a company. So actually there is no trade-off as such. And for example, a company with a deep purpose at the center and focus on all stakeholders with a strong set of values is likely to have reduced employee turnover. And in an environment where there is a war for talent, this could actually be a source of competitive advantage. So I would say there is a growing realization, and surely a large number of businesses are trying to internalize it. And then you use the right word, internalizing it, because that's very critical. Otherwise, even with the best intentions of the board, this won't get institutionalized, and ingraining it into the DNA is very, very critical. As Mr. Kotak also mentioned that, I mean, it's a question of state of mind and not really mandate.
Absolutely. And you know, my 2 bits on this is that this is a evolving conversation. I think we have moved a little beyond lip service. We're somewhere in the middle. So on a scale of 10, I think the adoption of stakeholder model of governance, I would say somewhere between 4 and 5. I mean, it's a very ad hoc kind of metric. But this is my personal view because I'm a creature of the corporate world as well.
Cyril, one quick observation there. You know, you're talking averages for the whole system. There are companies that are at 8 or 9, and there are companies that are at 0 or 1 or 2. So, आप average की बात कर रहे हो? You know, company का भी फर्क होता है.
I was going to say exactly that that there are companies who are sort of above that mark and there are companies below the mark. But on an average, this is if you look at the sort of corporate India as a whole, and I think that I have an observation on the reason why some of those are in that slot is that in cases where the stakeholder model of governance is more deep rooted. And वो क्या कहते हैं आत्मा में घुस गया है, then it is then you're more likely to be above the average, and those who are doing it only because उसमें थोड़ा better valuation मिलेगा, and there will be folks like Amar and Navneet will look at them differently, where the driver is market capitalization is where you find that they're closer to the average because at some level they're faking it. So, but those who have actually internalized it deeply into their entire strategy, into their very existence, and have aligned themselves with the purpose, are the ones who I think are actually doing a lot better. So if I can now sort of move on a little bit into the ESG conversation, I think Amar touched upon it a bit in terms of the ESG framework. And my kind of starting proposition is that because of all the policy work that has gone on in India all these years, G is far ahead. E has picked up a lot of momentum post-pandemic for obvious reasons. S is sort of struggling a little bit, and I think there is just so much social change that is happening, is that it is also lagging behind. But again, there is an increasing spotlight on it because the way the talent market and the kind of millennial and Gen Z-led conversations are taking place. I think corporate India and society does not have a choice but to pay attention to S. But if there was a kind of a three people were walking, G is the further, E and S are somewhere kind of close, but I feel S is a little behind. E is ahead because of all the climate change conversations and folks like Greta Thunberg and all of there's so much of public consciousness around it. Now, kind of back to the same kind of ESG conversation. Question to all of you is that, in your view, panel, is that a good framework in which we should analyze and adopt the stakeholder model of governance? Is that a kind of a good toolkit to have E, S, and G? If I kind of take care of it, this is a good way of approaching the stakeholder model of governance, which is actually a little broader, but this is a more practical way of looking at it. Sanjeev, a question for you.
No, so I'll talk about our own experience. See, the truth is we had never heard of the ESG framework till about 4 or 5 years ago, until one investor brought it up, and Arun mentioned on our board. Arun is no longer on our board, but at that time he was. He mentioned, "Bhai, ye ESG dekh lo, it's getting traction." And when we look at it closely, so I think ESG was useful because it allowed us to put a spotlight on all the underlying issues, right? It's a good framework. Of course, it should not. It should be a guide and not sort of something to check the box with. You should actually get deeper into issues. But I'll tell you one thing: among the younger companies, which are younger founders, first generation entrepreneurs, the tech companies, which have got younger employees, the employees themselves, will not want to work for an unethical company. And we are seeing that look, people are bothered about these things. The Gen Z, the millennials, their customers are Gen Z and millennials. They do not want to sort of give custom to companies not ethical. So and the founders themselves are deeply committed to this, by and large, because they believe they're doing good and they want to do good. They started the business to do good. It's not a business they inherited. It's not practice they inherited. They've built from scratch, and they started to do good. And therefore, I think if they're not there today, they will be there tomorrow. I do believe there's some distance to be traversed, but I think they'll get there and they're moving faster.
No, I agree with that. But Arun, your thoughts?
I
need to talk a little bit about the work that you're doing with IIM Ahmedabad on ESG as well.
Yes, we've recently set up a center to do research on ESG at IIM Ahmedabad, which is alma mater of Sanjeev and mine. And the reason that center was set up is that I found, and some other people found, that there is a lot more work to be done to understand properly what ESG means, what it stands for, how to deal with it, both from companies' perspective as well as from investors' perspective. There are also some issues as to what is the practical way to move forward. You can take a MSCI rating of a company or a definitive rating of a company. They don't really match up. The weightage given to E and S and G are different, and within each one of these parameters, the weightages are different. So companies are struggling to figure out, so what should I do as I want to improve my performance of ESG? So they need to sort of go through that, figure out what one rating agency is saying versus the others, what their own judgment is, how do they want to move forward? Because apart from rating, there is, as Sanjeev mentioned, many of the people want to do good. They want their companies to be nice to environment. They want to really embrace the stakeholder capitalism that we are talking about. So the situation, as I see, that there is a fair bit of confusion. There is lack of research. There is lack of data, both from company side as well as from investor side. And that's why I think some more research is required. And I think IIM Ahmedabad is well positioned to undertake that research. And that's what we propose to do.
Thanks. Amar?
Well, I think there's a large amount of overlap between ESG factors and the aspects that are relevant to stakeholder capitalism, but it's not a complete overlap. There are stakeholders who do not neatly fall into the E, S, and G buckets. You think of suppliers, for instance. Where do you put suppliers? They're obviously a stakeholder in the business, but are they looked after under E or S or G? When you think of government and tax responsibility for paying the rightful amount of tax, where does that come into the picture? So there are aspects of stakeholder capitalism and responsible business practices which doesn't completely fit into the ESG framework. But so we think there is something that's a bit more fundamental to ESG metrics, which ultimately is the purpose. The purpose of the business is something that Larry Fink, our chairman at BlackRock, has emphasized from about 3-4 years ago. What is the fundamental social need that your company, our company, is serving? That will set the compass and direction for long-term strategy, for what are the business decisions that make sense, and for what a company should avoid doing. For BlackRock, our purpose is we help more and more people experience financial well-being. That's our purpose. And we have a whole range of different investment products, but it's all geared towards helping our clients, the ultimate investors, experience financial well-being. And I think different companies would have different articulation of that purpose. About 10-15 years ago, there was a lot of emphasis on mission. The mission is what do you want to do as a company? Purpose is why is your company there? And so we think purpose is more fundamental than mission. And with purpose, the other aspects of direction of the company, I think, fall into place. And it's more fundamental than ESG in our view.
No, absolutely. And I think there are lots of books written on this also. I think Professor Colin Myers has also published a lot of thought-provoking literature on this, on the true purpose of a corporation. And going back to the history of why the joint stock company was invented. We've never always had company. The company is roughly a 200-year-old creation, and the original purpose of why a company was created, because it was based on a license from the state, a license to operate given by the state at that time, the sovereign, that I'm allowing you to form this corporation for serving a particular purpose, so whether it's running a waterworks or building a road or whatever. But that kind of goes back to the real intellectual roots of why a corporation exists and why does society give you the license to operate. And I think partly, Amar, that answers your question also of some of the other stakeholders, like the states, like taxes, for instance, or other broader duties to society in the state. They may not all neatly fall under E, S, and G, but if you take the broader purpose and license to operate perspective, I think then you can kind of make sense of the whole thing. So it's like a Venn diagram where I think there is some overlap, but then there are pieces which are outside it as well. But as a practical tool for companies, I think, and there's so much literature and so many indices and so many kind of manuals developing around ESG that it may be kind of a baby's guide to broader stakeholder governance. You follow ESG, and I think you should be mostly 80-90% all right. Navneet, your thoughts on this ESG versus stakeholder, and how do you see it?
So what the framework is trying to achieve is like companies' current earnings aren't borrowing from the future earnings, or the revenues are driven by sustainable practices. Companies have high standards of governance. Your products, services are low carbon or health benefits, or the social benefits, so on and so forth. And one can say what gets measured gets improved, and that's what the ESG frameworks try to achieve. But I think Mr. Duggal rightly mentioned about not taking that checklist, and that too based on like maybe what's happening in some other parts of the world done by other rating agencies. But as like Einstein rightly said, everything that counts can't be counted, and everything that can be counted doesn't count. So it should not be looked at as a checklist or trying to achieve a certain score. But the framework can surely help us in like moving from a pure shareholder primacy to a stakeholder primacy. And Cyril, what you mentioned, like wo atma mein chala gaya. So how do you get that soul that gets kind of like transformed? I think that should be the ultimate objective.
And you can tell the difference.
Exactly, yeah. Versus agar mere ko score achieve karna hai without taking names, I think some of the highest, scores in ESG have been by the, claimed by the companies which didn't have that great a track record, or maybe rather a much poorer track record. So I think that's very, very important when we talk about the ESG. It's not about that numerical number, but it's about that soul and the purpose that Amar talked about. Yeah.
Absolutely. But, there's, I'm sure you're also been watching some of the conversations that are taking place on what's called purpose washing.
Like greenwashing, yeah.
Greenwashing, purpose washing.
Yeah.
So, but there's no, you get all kinds. So, without being overly cynical about that, I think, and I'm sure, experts like you who actually put money to work, you are able to see through where there is real purpose and where there is purpose washing. Question to the panel in terms of as India picks up speed on a stakeholder model of governance, of course, ESG may be crutches or, toolkits along the way. What would be some of the lessons and kind of guiding principles that you would have, and what advice would you give to, the people who are watching this webinar in terms of how they should be evolving their thinking as we move towards a broader stakeholder model of governance and create a kind of overall fairness and efficiency in the market? Because I think, as Vikram said, and so did Mohandas Pai, that it's our battle to lose. India's time has come. Everybody, every major economist or thinker in the world is predicting an unbelievable growth in India. The predictions on what will happen in 2030, 2050. Now, whether they're right or wrong, time will tell, but at least the general direction is very clear. And one of the ways in which we could lose that battle is if we screw up our corporate governance as well. So with that background in mind, one or two tips from you, apart from the obvious ones of don't break the law, don't steal, all of that stuff aside, but something really insightful to boards and chairmen who are watching this. What would you advise? Arun, you seem to be all set for the answer.
Yes, I am. And let me talk a little bit about gender balance. Obviously, we've been working at it in India for many years. Even in the Companies Act, we had introduced this concept of a woman director at the board level. And then we modified that to include independent woman director. And we've made progress. 7 years ago, the number of women directors was about 4.5%, has moved to 16%. And the boardroom dynamics, the discussion, the influence this is having is very visible. To me, at least, I've found a real change is slowly happening by getting a diversity of views as well as having a little bit more understanding of many stakeholders like our female customers, our female employees, the society in general. But I think it's just starting. I'm doing some work further in this area to look at what is happening at the CXO level and what's happening at the senior management level. On those levels, we are where we were in the board level, 7 years ago. The numbers are very bad. So there has to be a concerted effort by the board, by the investors, to push the companies to get more in terms of gender balance. In India, the female participation in labor force is only 20%. In America, it's 55%, China 60%. So we are at a great disadvantage the way we are handling these gender issues. So there is much work to be done in this area. And I would recommend all the companies to take steps to gradually improve their gender balance.
That's a great, very specific suggestion, Arun, and I think it's a great takeaway. It's actionable and it's pinpointed in terms of what I agree with that. And I think, from boards where I've seen as well, I think I agree that those with, and not just gender diversity, broader diversity of whether it's skill sets or, different types of directors, the outcomes of decisions at boards with a diverse composition and what I call the wholesome board. So the movement from kind of one-sided or binary boards to a wholesome board is the journey to take. So one-sided boards are, the one-sided boards. The binary boards are where there's a promoter and then there is everybody who's anti the promoter. And that's a very dysfunctional model as well. But a wholesome board is where the whole board takes responsibility and whole board participates and has a free and frank, culture of conversation. So if we move towards the direction of a wholesome board, of which diversity is one critical ingredient, I think that is one critical, key success factor. Sanjeev, your advice?
My advice is very simple. You got to work on the promoter's head and his mind and his attitude. And if you can shape that, because the promoter, the principal shareholder, the CEO, the founder, whoever, I'm not just saying promoter, if he is thinking straight and thinking right, I think a lot of change will happen. Then you push through all the other changes.
No, I agree with that. That the promoter exercises a lot of influence. But how do you legislate morality?
You can't legislate. You can't legislate. You've got to see. But I'll tell you, there are a number of forces at play which are putting pressure on companies to be better governed. And frankly, if you're listed, and you're looking for a better reputation, you're looking for a better investor profile, you're looking to attract good independent directors, you're looking for perhaps a high valuation, and all those good things, you will have to play ball. No two ways about it.
So, if I can just sort of put a provocative question on, in terms of should we look at some of the incentive structures, because sometimes promoters behave the way they behave because there is something fundamentally kind of mixed up in some of the incentive structures.
No, there's a fundamental belief that some promoters have, that the company is my personal property. Yes. It does not belong to all the shareholders. It belongs to me because I started it. It's my family's. So what if somebody holds some shares? It doesn't mean that they have equal rights. So if you can drive that into your head, see, I'll tell you, I'm a first generation entrepreneur. I bootstrapped for 10 years and we raised money from ICICI Venture. One of the first things they said was, listen, please understand, it's no longer your company alone. Just understand that, internalize it. Right? After they disburse the money, they said that. And I said, yes, I accept that.
In the Kotak committee report, in fact, I was a member of that committee. There's a whole paragraph in some of the initial comments on the Raja Praja model. So which is what you're talking about. So,
well, I refer to as Naukar Malik model, but anyway.
Okay, Raja Praja is a bit more dignified. But
Sanjeev, you raised this question. It's a very deep question. How do you change that mindset? I have two suggestions. One is the institution of independent directors needs to be further strengthened. At the moment, because of the regulatory interventions, etc., the independent directors have so many liabilities that not many good people or not sufficient good people want to undertake this. So I think that needs to be lightened. We need to get our best professionals as independent directors, and they will influence the promoter.
Yes, possibly so.
So, Arun, I don't fully agree with that, because what is happening is overcorrection. So in this last round of changes that have come on related party transactions, now so many of these decisions have to be made at audit committees where the composition has to be only independent directors. So just imagine if something went wrong. Independent director, the whole blame will be on the independent director. Now, you can't change the mindset of a promoter, to quote Sanjeev, just based on some kind of checks and balances structure that you create, that independent directors are going to kind of be a watchdog. So what you then land up creating is what I call a gatekeeper anxiety, where the independent director just say no to everything.
I beg to differ.
Yeah, you have to make sure that you don't overcorrect and create gatekeeper anxiety.
Not at all. If you have in a board professional, independent directors who are driven by their own professional reputation, a sense of right and wrong, these decisions, when they come up, and if there is a diversity of backgrounds, as you mentioned earlier, I think that debate will start, and no promoter will be able to steamroll decisions on related party transactions or anything.
But Mr. Dugal, I think the crucial thing is, do you have an environment culture on the board where independent directors feel confident and capable enough to actually challenge the promoter?
Correct, that's the one.
If you cannot challenge the board, if you're beholden to him because you're giving a
But Sanjeev, if anybody wants to see that in action, they should attend Info Edge board meeting.
No, that is true. But how do you make that the norm?
Yeah.
So, sir, this is precisely the conversation we used to have when we were working on NSE Prime and several years back with Nirmal and the other people, Deepak Satswaligar and all. And I think over a period of time, we need to move towards more market-based structures like, the NSE Prime, where it's incentive versus the mandate. The incentive of getting greater visibility, greater respect from all stakeholders. And that's what will drive you towards better governance, or let's say a better stakeholder.
No, but Navneet, you can check all those boxes, but if the independent directors do not challenge the promoter in that board meeting,
but also
you still have a problem.
There is a fear that gets created that, at any point in time you are not following it, then you get the disabled from the list as well. So you always have that carrot and stick. But I agree with you. Again, using the great word that Cyril used earlier, that it has to get into that Atma. Unless it's there in the soul, whatever you do on your external body will always be like cosmetic. Yeah. But I would say there is no one size fits all. And it's a lot about building the right culture and the right character. And I remember, I think it was the Andy Grove who said that, that the job of the board is to ensure that the success of a company, if I remember correctly, something like this, that is longer lasting than any CEO's reign. It's longer lasting than any product cycle or any market opportunity. And it's not a journey. It's a journey and not a destination.
So Cyril, may I narrate a story?
Yes.
2 minutes. So look, we raised venture capital from ICICI Venture, and they immediately said that, listen, we need a Big Five auditor. Was one of the Big Five auditor, and I said, are you crazy? It'll be very expensive. We can't afford it. We are a 36 lakh turnover company. We are making a 1.8 lakh. We're barely breaking even. I'm not taking a salary. It'll be too expensive. They insisted. So I went shopping. I went to each of the Big Five, right? And I found that somebody was 5 lakhs, 10 lakhs, 15 lakhs audit fee when our turnover was 36 lakhs. And I said, this doesn't add up. So finally, somebody introduced me to a partner, to Kaushik Datta of Pricewaterhouse. He said, what do you want? So I said, look, I want a 1 lakh audit. Okay. So he said, okay, fine. I'll give you a 1 lakh audit in first year, provided you let me grow my audit fee to my regular fee levels. as your company grows. I said, sure. And you have to promise me two things. You see, you have to reduce my work. I cannot be second guessing you. You cannot be, lying to me, hiding. So I said, no, of course we'll never do that. He says, no, but listen, I want you to promise me one thing. You have to internalize and remember your CFO, your auditor, and your independent directors are there to save you from yourself. So if you internalize that and work with that sort of mindset, I will take your audit. Right. And really, that's how we have worked. And that's why our board work has thus far at least been working so well.
That's a great story. Absolutely. I think it kind of reinforces the principle that there is something which is more intangible about the culture of an organization that ultimately really results in a well-balanced stakeholder model. And I think if I can come in a little bit from my profession point of view as well, I think the role of law. So, Navneet mentioned market, and the market is not merely about investors. I think, one reason why there is a perception about better corporate governance in the US is also because of the legal system. I mean, if you do something egregious, there is a big fat class action suit, and that keeps everybody in line as well. So there's a very interesting article in today's Financial Times on environment litigation that Roger Cox, the lawyer who took on Shell, and he's written, of course, he's written a book saying that lawyers are the last hope, and but for lawyers now nothing is going to change. Now, while that might be a bit of an overstatement, I think there is some truth in that.
You may be conflicted here, Cyril.
Pardon?
You may be conflicted here. I'm just joking.
No, that's why I made my disclaimer in the beginning. No, that it may sound self-serving, but there is a grain of truth in the fact that the average, weightiness of a corporate governance system of society is also directly linked to the efficacy of the legal system at that point of time. कोई law से डरता ही नहीं, तो फिर you'll get what you get. Whereas if there is a fear of the law,
but that is changing. That is changing. If you look at the last 2, 3, 4 years, what's been happening to in some situations.
Yeah.
And I won't name names. I mean, that is changing. Yeah, Cyril.
No, I agree with you. But India is a very complex country, and we have our own. It's a topic for another seminar on how to change the legal system. But there is a connection between the state of governance and the state of the legal system, and in a way, both are moving at 10. Amar, you've been wanting to say something.
Yeah, thanks, sir. I think there is a fundamental problem about accountability of independent directors. The information that the board gets is from the management, yet the board is supposed to oversee the management. But when investors and shareholders, who are, I think, important stakeholders, when they have a view to present, again, it goes via management, CEO, CFO, maybe just the IR person, and they relay to the board. Until and unless you have independent directors, or at least non-executive directors, who are interacting directly with shareholders, they are not getting an unfiltered view of the concerns of the market. And so my strong recommendation,
Yes.
India already has lead independent directors, but one of the responsibilities of the lead independent director should be that he or she is available to interact with stewardship teams, with investors, and be there at the AGM to explain all the related party transactions that the company has done, and also to be available for one-on-one meetings to explain to the bigger shareholders on what's been happening. Then the accountability is not just to the promoter who helped to nominate you and bring you to the board and re-elect you, but there is an independent director who knows that he or she also has to explain to the other shareholders. Then the sense of accountability to the general shareholders improves. And that's my suggestion.
I mean, that's again a very specific suggestion. That's helpful. I think we're kind of running out of time, but there are a few questions. So would you like to make any kind of last observation before we go to questions?
I would just make, Amar, one comment that both at InfoEdge and a few other companies that I've been on board of, we had the practice of inviting in board meetings the investors. And that interaction of having those investors interact with the board, with the independent directors, was extremely valuable, both sides. And I think that has been a good practice that I've seen.
Thank you for that. So whoever is sort of monitoring the questions, Priya or Tirthankar, I know there have been some audience questions. Can you sort of share them?
I think one question that we have is, Priya, go ahead, please.
No, we put 3 questions there. Can you just read them?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's to the entire panel. One question goes, what are views on making a few key appointments like chairman of audit committee, CFO, and company secretary through stakeholders? That's general meeting appointment. This might bring further independence. Views of the panel.
Arun?
I won't agree with that. I think these appointments need to be done very carefully. And I think the management at the first go needs to apply all, their judgment to select these individuals, and that the board should apply their judgment in confirming them. If we make it too much broader than then it becomes an election.
Anybody like to add?
No, I would be supportive of Arun's view.
Yeah, it is the boards or the management's prerogative. Okay, Tirthankar, second question.
Well, we have another one. How do you strengthen independent directors? Is there anything in the law that can be done to better how, basically the travails of independent directors in the recent times? I mean, can something be done in the law which can, better the lot of independent directors? They seem to have faced music. Many IDs have quit, citing bad governance. Does it mean all is well?
Cyril, if I could make a comment, I think this is a perfect case where less is more. The less regulations you have on independent directors, the better quality of people you will get.
I think there's also a problem of kind of overdoing it. I mean, I won't take names, but we've seen recent examples of people who've retired from boards and getting arrested and all of that. And these are the kind of stories which spooks out people as well. So I think there is a broader issue of independent directors not feeling safe and that they can be kind of hauled up for something that they were not even aware of. But frankly, I don't see any kind of single solution to it. And even if a law was to be passed, and there are already laws on that, it's part of the risk of doing business and part of the risk of taking up that. There is no magic bullet for it.
Last question here is, does Indian corporate governance needs a complete makeover, revamping to empower customer-centric, responsible corporate citizenship?
So I'll reserve my vote on it. Let Amar and Sanjeev.
Complete makeover means what?
We don't get that in the question.
Yeah, so I don't know what complete makeover means. I mean, it's a nice slogan, but heck yeah, geez.
Yeah. Sorry, Amar, go ahead.
I think if you take the statement at literal value, you risk throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah, that's right. I don't think there are fundamental problems about corporate governance in India. I think you do have boards with majority independent directors, when the chairman is not independent and so on. And you do have eminent people who are on the boards and as I understand, often do put questions to the promoters, etc. I don't think the whole thing needs to be revamped. But I think we do need to think for all companies, how do we increase the sense of accountability of independent directors? How do we help strengthen the position of independent directors? And as I say, one way is to have some independent director to meet investors and shareholders. Another idea, which I don't see in any of the markets, is for the longest serving independent director or the lead independent director to write a report, to write a statement in the annual report. After chairman's statement, CEO statement, then lead or longer serving independent director to write a statement to explain what they've done over the year and to explain all the related party transactions. Because often you have these footnotes with 4 or 5 pages related party transactions, and you wonder how could that have been passed? And I think a statement by an independent director at the front of the annual report increases the accountability, and the independent director will be telling the chairman and the CEO, I'm going to have to explain this in the annual report. You're not making it easy for me. It increases their position, I think, on the board.
Sanjeev?
Look, I think the problem is not with accountability of independent directors. I believe, as Arun says, they're already over accountable. I think the problem is the accountability to independent directors. Is the promoter actually accountable? And how do you strengthen that is the question.
I would
Also,
just
one note of caution I have over here is that the entire discourse on corporate governance is kind of seen from the lens of conflicts of interest, related party, disclosures, non-disclosures, all of that. And all of them are absolutely important. I'm not taking away anything from them. But we are not putting enough focus also on things like strategy, succession, and some of those kind of, more philosophical issues that are important for the quality of a board. Uski to koi baat hi nahi karta. I think there is and they also go to the part of the value creation. So I think we should move away a little bit from this kind of unidimensional view of corporate governance, as corporate governance is a reflection of how many related party transactions you did not have or how much disclosure did you make. Yeah, of course, all of that is very, very important. No question about that. But can we broaden the conversation?
Cyril, I'd just like to make one comment answering that question about independent directors. I think NSE Prime has a very good idea that there should be a committee of independent directors. These guys should meet without the management, without the promoter, and talk about things so that a consensus can be developed.
I agree. Finally, it is about
we should not bash
culture of kind of constructive tension at the board. I think they will have a direct relationship with the quality of governance. Where, to quote Sanjeev, can somebody question or push back the promoter? That's a very good indicia of that. Navneet, you were saying something?
And I was saying we should not bash ourselves so much. I mean, we are at $2,000 per capita. This is where US was in 50s, UK in 60s, Japan in 70s, Korea and Taiwan in 80s, and compare ourselves where we are today. We should take pride. And it took 40 years for US Business Roundtable to redefine the purpose of the organization, that it is to serve a wider set of stakeholders than shareholders. They agreed that business needs a societal license, but we should take pride that Jamshedji Tata said it several decades back, that business exists to serve the society. Community is the reason for its existence. And there are so many groups, I mean, whether it's a Tata or Mahindra, who always focused on wider set of stakeholders. And I think, but I'm sure, I mean, Sanjeev has mentioned it a couple of times that for every Tata or Mahindra or SDFC or InfoEdge, there would be several who may not have the same belief system or the same value system. But at the margin, I think the realization is setting in that we need to move towards that direction of a stakeholder engagement. The stakeholder primacy rather than shareholder primacy.
Thank you. So, Priya, with that, unless
I just have one question for the investor. So, Sanjeev spoke about the fact that his customers, the Gen Z, the millennials, are actually pushing certain practices onto companies. But what about investors? What about institutional investors? How much are the Gen Zs or the millennials actually changing behavior at, say, BlackRock or HDFC?
Can I? I mean, sorry, Amar, go ahead.
Well, some of the speakers have mentioned earlier, there is a war for talent. There is, the younger people want to work with organizations that they are proud to work for. And there's more and more choice now. And so, BlackRock is very proud within our organization of encouraging diversity, not just gender diversity, but ethnic diversity and inclusiveness. And that is something that we also look for in the companies that we invest in. Gender diversity is the easiest way to measure whether there is diversity on the board, and that's something that we're working on in the companies, that the investee companies of BlackRock. It's not just because these are pressures from the Gen Z. It is ultimately because this is in the interest of our clients, our investors, that companies have a sense of direction, a purpose, and that business practices are creating sustainable long-term value. And that is the ultimate goal that we have in our stewardship.
If I can take a minute, honestly, my biggest hope on driving this change that what we have been talking about for last an hour or so is on younger generation. I think it's very visible that they express their views when they are buying goods and services. They're clearly thinking of its impact on planet and people. When they are investing, they are as much concerned about what their money is doing to planet and people as much as what it is earning. When they are making a choice on job or employment, they are looking for a deep sense of purpose and empathy in their prospective employers. So I feel very optimistic that the move towards stakeholder expectations or stakeholder primacy against shareholder primacy will be a lot more driven by this cohort than anything else that we have talked about.
Oh, thank you. So with that, I think maybe I'll bring an end to the panel and hand it back to Vikram and Tirthankar to conclude the proceedings.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Shroff. Vikram, did you want to add anything at this point?
No, it's okay. Go ahead, please.
Well, there are a number of questions that we have received on NSE Prime per se, and for that, please reach out to the NSE team, as Priya had pointed out earlier. The regulation department would also put up an FAQ on the NSE portal soon, so companies can get more information about this structure. And after a structure like NSE Prime, we had a really exhilarating discussion that really took up a much bigger question on stakeholder versus shareholder capitalism. We touched upon so many aspects here. The broad sense one could get was, as Navneet pointed out, we are a $2,000 per capita economy. We should be proud of what we have achieved at this point. And there is clearly a long way to go, but I think we are on the right track. On really the right track. With that note, I take this opportunity to thank everyone. I thank Mr. Kotak. I thank Mr. Pai for their keynote addresses. I thank each and everyone on the panel, Mr. Shroff, Mr. Munod, Mr. Gill, Mr. Bigchandani, and Mr. Dugal. Really, thanks a lot. As a token of our appreciation, NSE has planted 11 trees in Sundarban National Park in each of your names. We'll send you the certificate shortly. I would also like to thank members of the media for covering the day's event. I thank for all the participants for joining us here. And an event like this would not have been possible without the support from all our colleagues at the Reg Department, the Marketing Department, and lastly our Managing Director, Mr. Vikram Limai. And thanks a lot, everyone. And that brings us to the end of this evening. We go on. More learned, we have a new product amongst us, and hopefully as NSE Prime comes up in July, we will have several companies coming up and trying to differentiate themselves in this market-based structure. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Great discussion.